"Don't eat the soup tonight, sir." Ivy Hale's small hands pushed the blue-rimmed bowl away just as Enzo Moretti lifted the silver spoon toward his mouth. The dining room went so quiet the candle flames seemed loud. A pale smear of soup darkened the white napkin she had pressed to the table edge. Aldo Ricci stepped forward at once. "The child is confused, sir." Valeria Moretti smiled softly. Ivy did not move. "Then why isn't that your spoon?" 3 hours earlier, the Moretti mansion looked less like a home than a place trained to keep secrets. Rain slid down the tall windows in thin silver lines, and every light in the main hall had been dimmed to the color of old whiskey. At the far end of the house, behind the swinging kitchen doors, Clara Hale tied her apron tighter and told her daughter for the third time to stay near the service hallway, not the dining room. Ivy nodded, because she was 8, because she knew adults got tired of warning children, and because her mother's voice had that careful softness it only had when powerful people were nearby. She sat on the lowest stair outside the pantry with her little drawing notebook on her knees, sketching the patterns she liked. The curled iron of the wine rack, the lion on the Moretti family crest, the long row of silver spoons laid out on a black velvet tray. Ivy liked drawing things in the order they belonged. It made the mansion feel less frightening. Inside the kitchen, Marco Bellini moved with the sharp, quiet rhythm of a man who had spent years being watched. Pots steamed, knives tapped, plates warmed under lamps. Everyone knew this dinner mattered. At midnight, Enzo Moretti was supposed to sign the port and casino agreement that men in darker suits had been whispering about all week. But Ivy did not understand contracts. She understood hands. Her mother's hands were always busy, always honest. Marco's hands were usually steady. Aldo Ricci's hands were usually too perfect, gloved, folded, never wasting emotion. That evening, Ivy saw one motion that did not fit. Aldo came through the pantry door carrying a single spoon wrapped in a towel, though the silver had already been counted. He paused when he saw Ivy. On the stair. "Back to your mother," he said, smiling without warmth. Ivy stood and tucked the notebook under her arm. "I'm not in the way. Children are often in the way before they know it." His voice stayed polite, but his eyes dropped to her notebook. A minute later, Clara appeared and pulled Ivy gently aside, whispering that Mr. Ricci could send them out of the staff rooms if he wanted. Ivy heard the fear under the whisper. She hated that sound more than any raised voice in the mansion. So she walked with her mother, but she looked back. Through the narrow gap before the pantry door closed, she saw Aldo unfold the towel. The spoon inside caught the light, smooth and bright, but wrong. Enzo's spoon had a tiny scratch near the engraved M. Ivy had drawn it twice that afternoon because the scratch looked like a falling star. This spoon had no scratch. Later, when the soup bowls were arranged on the service cart, Ivy noticed another wrong thing. The bowl with the deep blue rim, the one always placed before Enzo because Valeria said tradition mattered, did not come from the same line as the others. Marco carried it from the pantry, not from the stove. It sat lower on the tray, as if it had waited somewhere cold. A thin skin had formed on top before the other bowls had even stopped steaming. Marco's face looked calm, but he wiped his palms on his apron after setting it down. Across the hall, Valeria Moretti stood beneath the portrait of Enzo's dead brother, her black dress perfect, her pearls soft against her throat. She asked Clara for fresh napkins, then corrected herself and asked specifically for the white linen ones, not the cream. Her smile never broke. Only her thumb moved, tapping 3 times against the stem of her wineglass while her eyes followed Aldo toward the pantry. Ivy did not know what any of it meant. She only knew objects had places, people had habits, and tonight too many things had changed at once. When Clara carried the folded napkins toward the dining room, one slipped from the stack and fell near Ivy's shoes. Ivy picked it up and held it. The cloth was white enough to show everything. Then the dinner bell rang. Guests settled. Chairs moved. Enzo entered in a black tailored suit, the gold Moretti signet ring heavy on his right hand, his face unreadable in the candlelight. He did not look cruel to Ivy. He looked like a man who had forgotten how to be surprised. Aldo placed the blue-rimmed bowl before him. Marco stood by the kitchen door. Valeria leaned forward and said, gently, "You should eat while it's hot, Enzo." But Ivy saw no steam rising from his bowl. She saw Aldo's gaze flick to the napkin in her hand. She saw the smooth spoon beside Enzo's plate. And when Enzo lifted the first spoonful toward his mouth, Ivy stepped out from the service shadow, pressed the white napkin to the rim, and caught the first pale streak of soup before anyone could stop her. The pale streak soaked into the linen faster than Ivy expected, spreading like a small cloudy bruise across the white cloth. For 1 second, nobody moved. Then chairs scraped softly against the polished floor, not all at once, but one by one, as if the adults were waking from the same bad dream and trying to decide who was allowed to speak first. Aldo Ricci was the first to step in fully. He did not look at Enzo's face. He did not look at the soup. His eyes went straight to the napkin in Ivy's hands. "Miss Hale," he said to Clara without raising his voice, "your daughter has forgotten where she is." Clara appeared at the edge of the service doorway, both hands pressed flat against her apron. Ivy saw her mother's fingers tremble once, then curl inward to hide it. "Ivy," Clara whispered, the word carrying apology, warning, and fear all at once. "Come here, baby." Ivy wanted to go to her. Her feet almost moved. But Aldo had already reached one gloved hand toward the napkin, and that made something inside her lock into place. She pulled the cloth against her chest. "No," she said. It was not loud. It was worse than loud because it was clear. Valeria Moretti let out a soft breath that sounded almost like sympathy. "Poor child," she said, turning slightly so the guests could see the sadness arranged on her face. "She spends too much time underfoot. Kitchens, hallways, adult conversations. Children pick up fear and turn it into stories." Her pearls shifted as she leaned closer to Enzo. "Let me handle this, Enzo. Your dinner is getting cold." Enzo did not look at her. He was staring at the spoon in his hand. It rested between his fingers with a stillness that made the entire room careful. The gold signet ring on his right hand caught the candlelight, then went dark as he lowered his hand beside the bowl. "Nobody touches the cloth," he said. Aldo stopped. Not suddenly. Not dramatically. He simply became still, one hand suspended in the air, palm open, as though obedience had caught him by the wrist. Enzo's eyes moved from Aldo to Ivy. "You interrupted my table," he said. "You touched my food. In this house, that is not a small thing." Ivy swallowed. Clara took one step forward, but a maid beside her gently caught her sleeve, afraid for both of them. "I know," Ivy said. "Then you will not give me feelings," Enzo continued. "You will give me something I can see." Valeria smiled again, thinner now. "Enzo, really? She is 8. 8 is old enough to tell what she saw," Enzo said. The room cooled around the words. Ivy looked down at the napkin. Her hands were small, and the linen was too fine for them, the kind of cloth her mother ironed but never used. She remembered Clara showing her how to fold corners so the Moretti crest faced out. She remembered being told never to stain the white linen because white remembered everything. "The bowl wasn't in the right place," Ivy said. Aldo's jaw tightened so slightly that only someone watching him would have noticed. Enzo noticed. "Which bowl?" he asked. Ivy pointed not at the soup itself but at the blue rim. "That one. It was on the little side tray first. Not with the others." Marco Bellini, standing near the kitchen door, wiped his hands once on his apron. "The child may have seen the staging tray," he said gently, professionally. "We separate bowls during service all the time. It keeps the line clean." "That sounds reasonable," Valeria said. "It is reasonable," Marco replied. But Ivy shook her head. The other bowls were steaming. Her voice grew smaller, but it did not break. "His wasn't." A murmur tried to rise at the far end of the table and died before. Could become a sound. Enzo looked at the bowl. The surface was glossy, almost too still. The candles above it trembled in perfect reflection. No steam curled from the rim. Valeria reached for her wine, but her thumb touched the glass 3 times before she lifted it. "Top, top, top." Ivy heard it because she had heard it before, beneath the portrait near the pantry, when Aldo came out with the towel. Enzo's gaze shifted to Valeria's hand, then back to Ivy. What else? Ivy's throat felt tight. She looked at her mother, and Clara's eyes begged her to be careful, but not to lie. That gave Ivy enough courage to breathe. The spoon, she said. Valeria's smile disappeared for less than a second. Aldo stepped in smoothly. Sir, with respect, we cannot let a frightened child invent a crime out of tableware. Enzo did not answer him. He turned the spoon slightly. It gleamed clean and bright in his hand. Too clean. Explain, he said. Ivy took one step closer to the table, still holding the napkin. Your spoon has a scratch by the M, she said. I drew it today. It looks like a falling star. Enzo's eyes lowered to the handle. No scratch. Across the room, Clara covered her mouth. For the first time that night, Enzo Moretti did not look dangerous. He looked awake. Ivy pointed toward the service hallway, where the pantry door stood half-closed in the candlelit dark. That's not the first spoon, she whispered. Mr. Ricci washed the first one twice. The words seemed too small to cross the room, yet they landed everywhere. Aldo's face did not change, but the skin below his left eye tightened once. A tiny betrayal in a man trained to look like polished stone. That is an unfortunate thing to say, child, he replied, still calm, still proper. Silver is washed before every formal dinner. Ivy shook her head. Not after it's already on the tray. Enzo Moretti turned the spoon between his fingers, slowly enough that the candlelight ran along the handle like water. There was the engraved M, deep and elegant, but no thin scratch beside it. He looked at the spoon as if it had become a stranger sitting in his hand. You drew my spoon, he said. It was not a question. Ivy nodded, and pulled her small notebook from under her arm. Her thumb fumbled once on the bent cover before she opened it. There were sketches inside that made a few guests exchange faint, impatient glances. Flowers from the wallpaper, a lion from the Moretti crest, the curve of a wineglass, the pattern of the silver lined up on the black velvet tray. But when Ivy turned to the right page, even the impatient faces became still. She had drawn Enzo's place setting. Not perfectly, not like an adult diagram, but carefully enough. Plate, knife, glass, blue-rimmed bowl marked with a little circle, spoon on the right, and near the letter M on the spoon handle, one tiny mark shaped like a falling star. I liked it, Ivy said, almost apologetically. It looked like it was flying. Valeria gave a soft laugh, the kind that sounded gentle until someone listened closely. Enzo, children draw stars on everything. We are all letting this become much too dramatic. She reached across the corner of the table as if to close the notebook for Ivy, but Enzo's eyes lifted before her fingers touched the page. Valeria withdrew her hand with a smile that came back half a second late. Leave it open, Enzo said. He did not raise his voice. He did not have to. The two guards near the archway straightened. Enzo set the wrong spoon beside the bowl, parallel to the knife, precise as a judge placing evidence. Rossi, he said to the guard closest to the service hall. Pantry, black velvet tray. Look for the silver assigned to my seat. The guard moved without asking another question. Aldo stepped slightly into his path. Sir, I can retrieve it myself. There is no need to disturb the service area. Enzo looked at him. Then you should have no objection to him finding it. Aldo moved aside. The silence that followed did not feel empty. It felt crowded with all the things adults were trying not to say. Clara stood frozen near the doorway, her face full of fear she could not afford to show. Ivy saw her mother's eyes move to the staff hallway, then back to the floor, as if even watching too closely might be considered disrespect. Ivy wanted to run to her, but the napkin was still in her hand, damp in one corner, and she knew Aldo was waiting for the moment she forgot it. So she folded it once, soup stain inward, and held it tight against her notebook. You may give that cloth to Mr. Ricci, Valeria said, her voice softening as if she were speaking to a nervous pet. He will have it cleaned. No one is angry with you. Ivy's chin dipped, but she did not hand it over. My mom says stains tell you what happened, she whispered. A thin line appeared between Valeria's brows and vanished. Your mother washes linens, sweetheart. She does not investigate them. Clara flinched. It was a small movement, almost nothing, but Enzo saw it. His eyes moved from Valeria to Clara, then back to the white napkin in Ivy's hands. Something in his expression cooled. Not softened. Cooled. Mrs. Hale, he said. Clara looked up as if hearing her name at that table had broken a rule. Yes, sir. Did you place my silver tonight? No, sir. Mr. Ricci said the family service would be handled by senior staff. Aldo answered before Enzo could turn. As is customary for contract nights. I asked her, Enzo said. Aldo bowed his head. Of course, sir. Ivy watched Aldo's right hand slide toward his jacket cuff, smoothing it once, then twice. Earlier, by the pantry, there had been a faint wet shine on that cuff, like water brushed against dark fabric. She looked at her notebook again, then at Aldo's sleeve. Enzo noticed where she was looking. He noticed everything now, but he still did not look as if he believed her. He looked like a man arranging doubt into separate locked boxes. Rossi returned from the pantry carrying a folded white towel on both palms. Not the black velvet tray, just the towel. His face was careful. Boss, he said quietly and stopped. Enzo extended his hand. Rossi placed the towel beside the wrong spoon. For a long second, nobody opened it. Then Enzo unfolded one corner with 2 fingers. Inside lay another silver spoon, still wet along the handle. The engraved M turned upward. Beside the M was a tiny scratch shaped exactly like the falling star in Ivy's drawing, and caught inside that scratch was one pale bead of soup. The pale bead of soup trembled in the scratch as if it had been waiting there to be seen. No one said anything for a moment, not even Valeria, whose practiced softness had carried the room until then. Enzo looked at the wet spoon, then at the wrong spoon beside his bowl, and finally at Ivy's white napkin folded tight against her chest. Do not clean anything, he said. Aldo's shoulders stayed square, but the smallest delay came before his answer. Of course, sir. Marco Bellini stepped forward from the kitchen doorway, his voice careful, wounded in just the right amount. Boss, with respect, this is still explainable. Silver is polished, bowls are staged, soup is moved. A kitchen is not a courtroom. Valeria nodded once, grateful for the reasonable tone. Exactly. We are frightening a child and embarrassing her mother over a service mistake. The words moved through the dining room like a silk cord pulled tight around Clara's throat. Clara stood near the service entrance with her eyes lowered. No longer a woman who had worked 12 hours without complaint, but a problem to be managed. Ivy saw 2 guests glance at Clara's apron, then away, as if shame could be caught by looking too long. Enzo saw it too, but he did not comfort anyone. Not yet. He placed the wet monogram spoon on the table and said, Then we will treat it like a service mistake. Valeria's mouth softened in relief. Aldo breathed once through his nose. But Enzo continued. Every bowl stays where it is. Every spoon stays where it is. Number the settings. Photograph the table. Seal the soup. The room changed again. Not louder, not faster, just tighter. His consigliere moved from the wall with a phone already in hand. A guard began taking pictures from the head of the table down, each flash catching crystal, silver, faces pretending calm. Aldo stepped forward. Sir, may I suggest we avoid involving outside personnel until we understand what happened? For the family's privacy. Enzo did not look away from the table. Privacy is what people ask for when they fear records. Ivy heard Valeria's glass touch the table a little too hard. Marco raised both palms gently. The soup came from one pot. If you test one, you test them all. Good, Enzo said. We will. The first humiliation came quietly. Aldo asked Clara to step away from the family line because staff statements would need to be taken separately. And he said it as if he were protecting procedure. Clara obeyed because poor people learn early that arguing with polite cruelty makes it look less polite and more deserved. Ivy did not move with her. She stayed by the table, one hand around the napkin, the other around her notebook. Ivy, Clara whispered, afraid now of every second her daughter remained visible. Valeria leaned down just enough to make herself look kind. "Sweetheart, this is adult business. You have already caused enough distress tonight." Ivy looked at the blue-rimmed bowl. The surface was still glossy. The other bowls had left faint rings of steam on the air, tiny ghosts above cream-colored porcelain. His had not. "It came from the side door," she said. Marco's face remained calm. "The side door to the pantry is used during formal dinners." "Not for soup," Ivy said. "The hot trays come through the double doors. I hear them because one will squeaks." A few people looked toward the service hall despite themselves. It was such a small thing, a child's memory of a bad wheel, but small things were beginning to cut deeper than accusations. Enzo turned to his consigliere. "Service route." Aldo answered before the man could move. "The route cards are in the pantry office. I keep them." "Then bring them," Enzo said. "No," he added as Aldo shifted. "Rossi will bring them." The guard went again. This time Aldo did not step in front of him. He only adjusted his cuff, covering the faint damp mark Ivy had noticed before. Valeria watched Ivy instead of the guard. Her smile returned, but it had lost warmth. "Children remember sounds," she said softly. "Not systems." Ivy looked at her and said, "I remember when sounds stop." The sentence settled over the room. Even Enzo looked at her then. What stopped? Ivy asked herself the same question in her head, because it had frightened her earlier without becoming words. "The squeaky wheel," she said. "When Mr. Aldo took the blue bowl, the cart didn't squeak." Rossi returned with a clipboard and a narrow paper strip stamped with the Moretti crest. Enzo took it. The route card listed 6 bowls from the kitchen line, all marked hot service, double doors. But besides seat 1, Enzo's seat, a different mark had been written in black ink. Pantry hold. Aldo's voice was smooth with relief. "There. A holding note. Perfectly normal when the boss takes calls before dinner." For the first time, Valeria truly smiled. Then Enzo turned the paper slightly toward the candlelight, and Ivy saw it before the adults did. The ink on pantry hold was darker than the rest, still shiny in the groove where the pen had pressed too hard. The wet ink did not shine for long, but it shone long enough. Ivy saw it catch the candlelight in a narrow black ridge, fresher than the neat printed lines above it, fresher than the other handwritten notes that had dried flat into the paper hours ago. Enzo saw her looking before she said anything. He tilted the route card, and the word hold gleamed once more. Aldo gave a small, almost patient smile. "Ink reflects under candlelight, sir. It means nothing." "Then it will mean nothing in evidence," Enzo said. He placed the route card on the table beside the wet spoon, the wrong spoon, the blue-rimmed bowl, and Ivy's folded napkin. "Photograph it before it dries." His consigliere lifted the phone again. Flash. The tiny wet shine became permanent in the room, captured before anyone could wipe it into history. Valeria's expression stayed composed, but her gaze moved toward the service hallway, toward the place where paperwork lived. "Enzo," she said, lower now, as if trying to return him to himself. "You are turning a dinner mistake into a spectacle." "No," Enzo said. "Someone turned my dinner into paperwork." Rossi came back carrying a sealed route envelope and a thin delivery slip clipped to the front. It had been taken from the pantry office where staff supplies were checked before formal meals. The envelope seal was broken, pressed flat again as if a careful thumb had tried to make damage look like use. Across the delivery slip, in a rushed blue signature, was written Clara Hale. Clara stared at it from the service doorway, and all the color left her face. "That is not mine," she said, but the words came out too quietly to defend her. Aldo turned toward her with the sadness of a man performing duty. "Mrs. Hale, no one is accusing you yet. But if a restricted ingredient entered this kitchen under your name, we must be honest about that." The humiliation did not arrive like a slap. It arrived like a chair being silently removed from beneath someone. Clara stood with her apron on, her hair pinned back from a long day of serving other people, and suddenly the entire room could imagine her as the easiest answer. Poor, tired, replaceable. A woman who could be blamed without shaking the foundation of the house. Ivy felt the shame aimed at her mother before she understood the document. She stepped forward, still clutching the napkin, and put her notebook on the edge of the table. My mom doesn't write her H like that. Valeria closed her eyes for half a second, then opened them with a gentle patience that was almost colder than anger. Sweetheart. Ivy did not look at her. She looked at Enzo. She makes the tall line first, then the little bridge. She taught me because Hale has to stand straight. Something moved behind Enzo's eyes, not emotion exactly, but attention sharpening until it became dangerous. Bring me one of Mrs. Hale's signed payroll forms, he said. Aldo's mouth tightened. Sir, personnel documents are kept in the administrative office. At this hour, perhaps tomorrow would be more appropriate. Tonight, Enzo said, and no one from this room touches it. A second guard left. The doctor had not arrived yet, but Enzo was already building the room like a case file. He ordered every item placed on the table to be photographed again from 3 angles. He told his consigliera to open a chain of custody note on his phone and read each item aloud. Stained linen napkin, blue-rimmed bowl, monogram spoon, substitute spoon, route card, broken route envelope, delivery slip. Each word made the dining room less like a family dinner and more like a place where lies were running out of corners. Ivy kept her hand on the napkin because she was afraid that if she let go, the adults would make everything clean again. The guard returned with a copy of Clara's payroll form. Enzo placed it beside the delivery slip. Even from where Ivy stood, the difference was obvious. Clara's H rose straight, then crossed softly. The delivery slip's H leaned backward, sharp and hurried, as if written by someone copying the shape but not the habit. Marco Bellini looked down. Aldo looked at the wall. Valeria looked at Enzo. A forged signature proves only that someone forged a signature, she said. It does not prove the soup was dangerous. Correct, Enzo replied. It proves someone prepared a person to blame. A phone buzzed near Marco's station by the kitchen door. It was a small sound, almost swallowed by the rain against the windows, but Ivy heard it because everything else had gone still. Marco reached for it too quickly, then stopped when Enzo's eyes moved to his hand. Leave it, Enzo said. Rossi picked up the phone instead and placed it face up on the table. One message notification glowed across the screen before it dimmed. The blue bowl is ready. The contact name above it showed only 2 letters and a period, but those 2 letters were enough to make Enzo's jaw set in a way Ivy had not seen before. Valeria gave a faint, wounded laugh. Those are common initials, Enzo. Enzo did not answer her. He stared at the screen longer than he had stared at the soup, longer than he had stared at the forged signature, and when he finally looked up, his eyes went not to Marco or Aldo, but to the woman seated closest to his right hand. Valeria sat perfectly still, one hand resting beside her untouched soup, the other near the stem of her wineglass. For a moment, she looked less like a woman accused than a woman waiting for the room to apologize to her. Enzo, she said, and her voice carried that familiar softness. The one she used at funerals, charity dinners, and family meetings where men twice her size lowered their eyes. You are tired. You are letting coincidence make strangers of us. Enzo did not answer. Rain tapped against the tall windows behind him, steady and cold, while the old wall clock above the sideboard counted out the seconds with a sound Ivy had never noticed before. Tick, tick, tick. It made the whole room feel as if it were waiting for a verdict nobody had earned yet. Enzo turned to his consigliera. Get Leonard on the phone. Not the contract team. My personal attorney. Valeria's fingers tightened around the glass, then loosened. Aldo's gaze flickered toward the service hallway. Marco stared at the phone lying face up on the table as if the glowing letters could burn through wood. Ivy did not understand attorneys or contracts, but she understood the way adults changed when the truth moved too close to them. Clara still stood near the doorway, and Ivy could see her mother trying to disappear without actually moving. Ivy stepped back until her shoulder touched Clara's apron. I don't want anything, Ivy said, so quietly only the nearest people heard. I just don't want them to say my mom did it. Clara's breath broke once above her head. Enzo heard. His face did not soften, but something in the room shifted because he had heard. "No one questions Mrs. Hale alone," he said. "No one removes her from this floor. No one speaks to the child without me or counsel present." Valeria laughed faintly, a wounded sound made for witnesses. Now Clara needs counsel? For a forged supply slip and a child's drawing. For a house that suddenly needs a poor woman to be guilty, Enzo said. His attorney's voice came through the consigliere's phone a moment later, tinny and alert. Enzo asked for 3 things, each in the same low tone. The emergency addendum to the port and casino agreement, the access log to the family medical room, and the digital audit trail for any file opened under his private health profile in the last 48 hours. No one moved while they waited. A server near the wall swallowed too loudly. The soup cooled in every bowl. The blue-rimmed bowl did not change at all. It had already been cold. When the first document arrived on the consigliere's tablet, Enzo read without blinking. The emergency addendum was 3 pages long, wrapped in clean legal language about continuity, stability, and family representation. If Enzo Moretti became medically incapacitated before midnight, temporary signing authority would pass to Valeria Moretti IV. Transactions already approved by the family office. Valeria leaned back slightly, not enough for most people to see. Ivy saw because Ivy was watching the spaces between movements. "You signed it," Valeria said. "After Luca's memorial. You said you trusted me to protect what he left behind." Luca. The name passed through the dining room like a door opening onto a colder place. Enzo's dead brother looked down from the portrait at the end of the hall, his painted eyes fixed on a family that had learned to turn grief into ceremony. Enzo finally looked away from the tablet and toward that portrait. "I signed many things that day," he said. "I buried my brother that morning." The second file arrived. Access log. Family medical room. 11:42 p.m. the night before. Entry authorized by Aldo Ricci's master key. File opened. Moretti, Enzo, restricted allergy history. Attached record accessed. Hospital admission tag. Private. 8 years prior. Aldo bowed his head with the care of a man choosing each inch of surrender. "Sir, I maintain records for the household. That is part of my duty." "At 11:42 at night?" Enzo asked. Aldo said nothing. Ivy's fingers tightened around the stained napkin. Then, from the doorway near the portrait, she remembered the silver flash she had seen before dinner. "Mrs. Moretti had an envelope," she said. Valeria turned her head slowly. "Excuse me?" Ivy did not step away from Clara. "A silver one, under Mr. Luca's picture. Mr. Aldo gave it to her. I thought it was for the flowers." The room went so quiet the rain seemed far away. Enzo's eyes closed once, only once, and when they opened, the danger in them was not anger. It was recognition. He looked at Valeria, then at Aldo, then at Clara and Ivy standing where the staff were supposed to be invisible, and for the first time that night he understood that he had not merely trusted the wrong person. He had let that trust place the weakest people in his house directly in the path of the knife. Enzo did not move for several seconds after that recognition settled inside him. The room waited for the explosion because men like him were supposed to explode when betrayed. They waited for a shattered glass, a shouted order, a hand around someone's collar, anything that would make fear simple. Instead, Enzo reached for his white pocket square and wiped one drop of rainwater from the back of his hand, though he had not been outside. "This dinner is over," he said. Valeria's eyes lifted quickly, measuring the sentence. Aldo lowered his head as if relieved by discipline returning. Marco closed his eyes for half a second. Enzo looked toward Ivy, then past her to Clara. "The child is frightened. Mrs. Hale will take her to the west sitting room." Valeria's shoulders softened almost imperceptibly, the first true relief she had shown all night. "That is wise," she said. "There is no need to keep humiliating the girl." Ivy stiffened at the word, but Clara's hand found her shoulder before she could answer. Enzo saw the child clutching the stained napkin and notebook like 2 pieces of a door she refused to let anyone close. "She takes those with her," he said. Aldo's gaze flicked to the napkin again. Sir, if those items are part of household service, I should catalog them. You will not touch them. Enzo's voice remained quiet. That made it worse. He nodded to Rossi. Escort Mrs. Hale and Ivy. 2 guards outside the room. No one enters without me or Leonard. Valeria's smile thinned. Guards for a maid and her daughter? For witnesses, Enzo said. The word did not fill the room loudly, but it changed where everyone stood. Clara walked with Ivy through the service doorway, not because she was dismissed, but because Enzo had just turned the hallway into protection. Ivy looked back once. Valeria was watching her now, not with pity, not with softness, but with the careful dislike adults reserve for small things that refuse to break. In the west sitting room, the lamps were low and the rain sounded closer against the windows. Clara knelt in front of Ivy and touched her face with both hands. Baby, why did you do that? Ivy looked down at the folded napkin. Because if I didn't, he was going to eat it. Clara shut her eyes. She did not say thank you, not yet. Thank you was too small for terror. On the other side of the house, Enzo walked into his private study with his consigliere, Leonard on speakerphone, and 2 security feeds opening across the wall monitor. He did not ask who had betrayed him. Not yet. He asked what could be preserved before fear started deleting itself. Back up the hallway camera, the pantry office, the medical room access panel, the memorial room if the old system still records. His consigliere hesitated. That camera hasn't been reviewed in years. Then nobody would think to erase it first. A file began loading on the monitor, a thin gray bar crawling from left to right. In the silence, Marco's phone buzzed again inside the evidence bag on the desk. Nobody touched it. Enzo stood with his hands behind his back, watching the bar move. In the sitting room, Ivy had opened her notebook because sitting still made her chest hurt. Rossi had given her a pencil from the side table, and Clara had asked her to draw only what she remembered, not what she guessed. So Ivy drew the pantry door, the squeaky cart, the blue bowl, Aldo's cuff. Then she drew the portrait of Luca Moretti at the end of the hall and the silver envelope below it in Valeria's hand. She stopped and frowned. The envelope had wax on it, she whispered. Clara leaned closer. Wax. Ivy nodded. Not red, black, like the seal on Mr. Enzo's papers. Rossi heard it from the doorway and made a call without stepping inside. 5 minutes later, Enzo entered the sitting room alone. Ivy stood too fast, the napkin still in her hand. Did I do something wrong? No, Enzo said. You remembered something small. He crouched just enough to see the drawing without making her feel trapped. Show me where she stood. Ivy pointed to the space below the portrait. There. She said flowers should be changed before midnight. But there weren't any flowers. Enzo looked at the black wax Ivy had shaded beside the envelope. His expression did not change, but his eyes went still. Back in the study, the memorial room camera finished loading. The footage was grainy, old, and silent. It showed Valeria standing beneath Luca's portrait at 11:37 p.m., opening a black-sealed envelope from Aldo, removing a page from the memory box where Enzo had kept condolence letters and signed memorial documents and sliding it into her clutch. Enzo watched without blinking. Behind him, Valeria appeared in the study doorway, her hand frozen on the brass handle, and for the first time all night she looked past Enzo toward the hall where Ivy had gone, understanding that the little girl was no longer standing alone. Valeria's fingers tightened around the brass handle, and the old latch clicked once under her hand. It was a tiny sound, but everyone in the study heard it. Enzo did not turn at first. He kept his eyes on the grainy image of her standing beneath Luca's portrait, slipping a signed page from the memory box into her clutch as if she were removing a flower from a grave. The footage played without sound, which made it worse. There was no excuse in it, no tone to soften it, no grief to hide behind. Just movement, choice, theft. Valeria recovered before most people would have realized she had faltered. That is a private family room, she said. You are recording grief now? Enzo turned slowly. His face had lost color, not with fear, but with the kind of pain that makes a man hate himself before he hates anyone else. I protected that room, he said. I thought it held the last honest pieces of my brother. Valeria lifted her chin. And I protected this family when you were too broken to read what you signed. No one moved. The file on the monitor stopped at the frame where Aldo handed her the black-sealed envelope. Enzo looked at it, then at the door behind her. Bring everyone back to the dining room. Valeria's eyes narrowed. Enzo. Everyone. 20 minutes later, the same long table sat under the same candles, but nothing looked like dinner anymore. The soup bowls were sealed in clear evidence bags. The silver was laid out on white cloth. The route card rested beside the broken envelope. The delivery slip with Clara's forged name lay next to her real payroll signature. The hospital tag sat in a small plastic sleeve. Its old ink faded, its meaning suddenly fresh and cruel. Ivy stood beside Clara near the doorway at first, because habit kept them there, even when no one had ordered it. Enzo saw it. He looked at the empty chair halfway down the table and said, Mrs. Hale. Ivy. Here. Clara froze. Ivy looked up at her mother, unsure whether a chair could be a trap. Enzo did not soften the order. You were both made part of this. You will not stand outside it. Clara walked as if every step crossed a rule built long before she was hired. Ivy climbed into the chair beside her, her notebook on her lap and the stained napkin still folded in both hands. Valeria remained standing at the far end, elegant, wounded, almost royal in her silence. Aldo stood behind her. Marco stood near the kitchen entrance with his shoulders curved inward, as if the doorway were the only thing keeping him upright. Leonard, Enzo's attorney, joined by video on a tablet placed at the head of the table. A doctor in a gray coat opened a folder and read without drama. The sample from the blue-rimmed bowl contained a concentrated allergen not present in the other 5 bowls. Not enough to look suspicious in taste. Enough to trigger a severe reaction in someone with Enzo's medical history. Enzo did not move. The doctor turned one page. The relevant allergy record was accessed last night. Leonard followed with the access log. Aldo Ricci's master key. 11:42 p.m. medical room. Restricted file. Hospital tag attachment. Then the security chief played the hallway footage. Aldo receiving a sealed package, Marco taking a small glass vial from him near the pantry, the blue-rimmed bowl bypassing the hot line, the real monogram spoon being carried away in a towel. Marco covered his mouth. Aldo stared forward. Valeria smiled faintly. All of that proves staff panic and staff weakness. Not mine. Ivy looked at her notebook. Then she looked at the video frozen behind Enzo, at the frame beneath Luca's portrait. The envelope had black wax, she said. Her voice was small, but it cut straight across the table. Like the papers in Mr. Enzo's study. But it was broken already when Mr. Aldo gave it to her. Enzo's eyes shifted to the broken route envelope on the table. The wax was black too, pressed flat by a careful thumb. Leonard asked the security chief to zoom the memorial room footage. The image sharpened just enough. On Valeria's thumb when she opened the envelope was a dark crescent of wax. The same crescent appeared later in the dining room footage when she touched her wineglass. Top, top, top. Enzo watched the mark repeat 3 times. Then Leonard displayed the bank trail. A payment from Valeria's charity fund to the same supplier listed on the delivery slip, routed through a catering vendor 2 days before the dinner. Finally, Marco stepped forward, shaking, and placed a signed statement beside the soup bowl. Aldo gave me the vial, he whispered. Mrs. Moretti said it would only make him sick. She said Clara would take the blame and no one would question it. That was when Enzo could not speak. Not because he lacked words, but because the room had finally shown him the shape of his own blindness. Clara had worked under his roof. Ivy had sat on his stairs drawing spoons because that was the only safe way a child could understand power. And Valeria had counted on both of them being too small to matter. Enzo reached for the stained white napkin. He unfolded it once and laid it in the center of the table, between Valeria and himself. Then he removed the Moretti signet ring from his finger and set it beside the cloth with a quiet tap. Leonard, he said, his voice flat enough to chill the candles. "Put every piece of this on record." Leonard did not ask Enzo to repeat himself. The attorney's image on the tablet became very still. Then he began naming each piece of evidence into the record with the careful pace of a man building something that could survive daylight. Stained white linen napkin, blue-rimmed bowl, monogram spoon, substitute spoon, route card with altered hold note, broken black wax seal, delivery slip bearing a forged Clara Hale signature, medical access log, hospital tag, emergency addendum, bank transfer trail, security footage, Marco Bellini's signed statement. With every item spoken aloud, Valeria seemed to lose another inch of the room she had spent years learning how to own. She did not cry. She did not beg. She looked at Enzo as if betrayal was something he had done to her by noticing. "You would put family business into legal hands?" she asked. Enzo looked at the napkin in the center of the table. "You made it legal when you used a contract. You made it public when you tried to frame an employee. You made it family business when you brought a child into it." Aldo finally looked up, his polished mask cracked by the smallest tremor in his mouth. He started to say Enzo's name, then seemed to remember he had no right to use it. Security did not drag anyone. Enzo gave quiet instructions, and the room obeyed. Valeria was removed from all family representation pending legal review. The charity account that had carried the supplier payment was frozen. The port and casino signing was suspended until outside counsel and the Port Authority reviewed the documents. Aldo was relieved of his position and held for formal questioning over forged records, evidence tampering, and unauthorized access to private medical files. Marco was not forgiven. His statement was logged, his badge taken, and Leonard told him plainly that cooperation would be noted, not confused with innocence. Clara sat through all of it with both hands folded in her lap, as if a chair at the Moretti table might vanish if she leaned too hard into it. Ivy sat beside her, the notebook closed now, the pencil resting across the cover. When Valeria was led past them, she did not look at Enzo. She looked at Ivy. Not for long. Just long enough for Ivy to understand that some adults hated being seen more than they hated being wrong. Enzo saw that too. "Mrs. Hale," he said. Clara stood by instinct. "No," Enzo said, and the word was gentler than an order but stronger than a request. "Stay seated." Clara sat back down slowly. Enzo turned to the room, to the guards, the staff, the lawyers on the tablet, the guests who had watched a maid nearly become the easiest lie. "Clara Hale did not bring that ingredient into my kitchen. She did not sign that delivery slip. She did not endanger this house. She served it with more honor than the people who claimed to protect it." Clara's eyes filled, but she did not lower them this time. Enzo continued, "And Ivy Hale did not cause a scene. She preserved evidence before any adult in this room had the courage to admit something was wrong. The apology that followed was not soft, not decorative, not hidden in a hallway. It was entered into Leonard's record. Clara's personnel file would be corrected by morning, with the forged document attached as proof of the frame. Her housing would be moved out of staff dependency and into an independent lease paid as part of a protected employment settlement. Her wages would be reviewed and back pay issued for unpaid overtime. A third-party reporting line would be created for every employee in the Moretti household and businesses, handled by outside counsel, not Aldo's office, not the family, not anyone who could punish a person for speaking. Ivy's statement would be taken only with Clara present and a child advocate approved by Leonard. Her notebook would be photographed, copied, and returned. The stained napkin would not be washed. Enzo folded it once, placed it into a clear evidence sleeve, and sealed it himself. Then he wrote the time across the label with his own pen. His handwriting was dark and steady. Near midnight, the dining room had emptied of everyone except Enzo, Clara, Ivy, Rossi by the door, and the rain softening against the glass. The soup was gone. The blue-rimmed bowl sat sealed in a box. In its place, a housekeeper who had cried quietly while giving her statement brought out 3 plain bowls of tomato soup from a fresh pot, served in white kitchen bowls with no crest, no silver ceremony, no tradition sharpened into a weapon. Clara tried to stand to help. Enzo stopped her with one look. "Tonight," he said. "You eat." Ivy picked up her spoon, then paused. She looked at Enzo's place setting. The scratched monogram spoon was not there. It had been sealed with the evidence. Enzo noticed and took an ordinary kitchen spoon instead. For the first time all night, Ivy almost smiled. "That one is yours?" she asked. Enzo looked at the simple spoon, then at the little girl who had held on to a stained napkin while a whole room tried to make her feel small. "It is tonight," he said. Ivy nodded, satisfied, and unfolded her napkin across her lap the way Clara had taught her. Corners straight, cloth clean, name unseen but finally honored. Outside, the Moretti mansion still looked powerful from the road, but inside, at the long table where a maid and her daughter had once been expected to disappear, the smallest voice in the room had been heard, and the truth had beaten the power built to silence it. "Listen to the voicemail before you sign," the little girl said. Vincent Moretti's silver pen stopped on the engagement papers. In the grand salon, under the chandelier, 8-year-old Emily Carter stood beside the servants' entrance with a cracked old phone trembling in both hands. Charles Bellamy moved first, smiling too calmly. "That is not your concern, child." Emily pressed play. A woman's broken voice rasped through the speaker. "Vince, if Bellamy is in the room, don't say another word." Then the phone went black. 3 hours earlier, the grand salon had smelled of lemon polish, old leather, and the white roses Isabella Romano had ordered for the signing table, even though Sophia Moretti had hated white roses in winter. Grace Carter noticed that first. She noticed everything quietly, the way a maid learned to survive in a house where every portrait seemed to be watching. She stood near the sideboard with a silver tray of untouched espresso cups, her white apron still damp at the hem from the kitchen sink. Her daughter, Emily, sat on the narrow bench near the servants' corridor, knees together, cardigan sleeves pulled over her hands, trying not to swing her feet against the wall. Vincent Moretti had not yet entered. His men had. 2 bodyguards in dark suits stood by the double doors. Dominic Moretti leaned near the fireplace, laughing softly into his phone, his cufflinks catching the light. Charles Bellamy arranged papers at the long marble table with the tenderness of a priest placing scripture on an altar. Isabella Romano walked behind him in a cream dress, touching the silver pendant at her throat whenever her eyes passed the covered portrait above the mantel. Emily watched that pendant longer than she meant to. It looked too old for Isabella, too cold against her skin, and when the woman turned, the silver flashed like something stolen from a drawer that had never been opened again. "Do not stare," Grace whispered without moving her lips. Emily looked down. In her lap was the old phone. It was wrapped in a folded dish towel, hidden under the edge of her cardigan. The screen was cracked like thin ice. The pale blue case had peeled at one corner. Grace had told her never to touch it, never to charge it, never to mention it in the big house. But that morning, while looking for thread in the sewing box, Emily had felt it buzz once in her hand, though no one had called. The black screen had lit up just enough to show a red voicemail dot, and one word where a name should have been, unknown. Then, for half a second before it died again, Emily had heard a breath. Not a message. Not yet. Just a breath, scared and close, like someone hiding behind a door. Now Charles slid one document above the others and tapped its corner with a gold pen. "The Family Continuity Trust should remain under the engagement packet," he murmured to Isabella. "Mr. Moretti only needs to sign once." Isabella's smile did not change. "After today, he can finally stop living with ghosts." Grace's fingers tightened around the tray. One spoon shifted, the small sound sharp enough for Charles to glance over. "Mrs. Carter," he said softly, "perhaps the child should wait in the kitchen." Emily felt her mother's body go still before she even looked up. Then the double doors opened, and Vincent Moretti entered in a black tailored suit, his father's silver watch at his wrist, his old wedding ring still on his right hand. The room straightened around him. No one told it to. It simply happened. He did not look cruel. That made him more frightening. He looked tired in a way money could not repair. Isabella stepped toward him with both hands open, beautiful and gentle. Dominic kissed his cheek like a brother. Charles placed the pen exactly where Vincent's fingers would reach it. Emily looked at the phone again. The red voicemail dot was still there. The battery showed 1%. On the marble table, Vincent lowered himself into the chair and turned to the final page. Grace shook her head once. A warning meant only for her daughter. But Emily had heard the voice. She had seen Charles look at the phone like it was a loaded gun. So she stood, walked into the grand salon, and before anyone could send her back to the kitchen, she placed the cracked phone on the silver tray. The last thing she saw before pressing play was not Vincent's face, or Isabella's smile, or Dominic's hand closing into a fist. It was the tiny label peeling from the phone case, and under it, scratched into the plastic by someone desperate, one crooked letter, S. The crooked S looked almost childish until Vincent saw it. Then the grand salon stopped breathing for a second time. The phone lay on the silver tray between the engagement papers and the untouched glass of red wine, its black screen reflecting the chandelier in broken pieces. Emily kept both hands near it, not touching it now, but guarding it the way a child might guard a sleeping bird. Charles Bellamy was the first to recover. He gave a small, patient laugh, the kind adults used when they wanted fear to sound like misunderstanding. Mr. Moretti, this is clearly inappropriate. That device appears to be personal property removed from a restricted bedroom. I'm sure Mrs. Carter can explain why her daughter has it. Grace's face changed before she spoke. Not guilt. Something worse. The look of someone who had been waiting years for a locked door to open and dreading the sound it would make. Dominic pushed away from the fireplace and slipped his phone into his jacket. Vincent, come on. The help gossip. They collect things. They imagine ghosts in every hallway. Don't let a little girl turn a family signing into a circus. Isabella crossed the room slowly, her cream dress whispering against the rug. She knelt in front of Emily with a softness so perfect it made the air colder. Sweetheart, she said, you probably don't understand what you played. Old phones do strange things. Sometimes recordings get mixed up. Sometimes children hear what frightened adults tell them to hear. Emily did not answer her. She looked past Isabella to Vincent. I heard her breathe before the words, she said, like she was hiding. Isabella's smile held, but one finger rose to the silver pendant at her throat. It was quick, almost nothing. Vincent saw it anyway. He saw Charles glance at the pendant too, then look away as if his own eyes had betrayed him. Vincent stood. No chair scrapped. No glass shook. Still, the room shifted back from him. Grace Carter, he said. Grace stepped forward with the tray still in her hands until she realized she was carrying it like a shield. She set it down carefully. One espresso spoon rolled half an inch and stopped beside the old phone. Charles reached toward the device. Vincent's voice cut through the movement. No, Charles froze with 2 fingers above the cracked screen. Of course, he said, smoothing his cuff. I only meant to preserve it. You will preserve your hands where I can see them. The silence that followed was thin and dangerous. Vincent turned to Grace. Where did that phone come from? Grace swallowed. Emily's cardigan sleeve brushed her mother's skirt, and that tiny touch seemed to steady her. Mrs. Sophia gave it to me, Grace said. The night she disappeared. Dominic exhaled sharply, almost amused. That is a serious accusation from a woman who signed a statement saying Sophia left on her own. Grace looked at him then, and for the first time her fear had an edge. I signed what Mr. Bellamy placed in front of me. Charles's expression did not change. You were read the statement. No, sir, Emily said. Her voice was small, but it landed hard. Mom can't read fast when she's scared. Vincent looked at the child then, not kindly, not yet, but carefully. Emily lowered her eyes as if expecting punishment, then forced herself to raise them again. She cried after. In the laundry room, she put the phone in the sewing box under the blue thread. Isabella stood. Vincent, this is becoming cruel. Grace is clearly emotional, and the child is repeating household stories. Vincent did not answer. He picked up the engagement packet, turned over the top page, and looked at Charles. Bring me the disappearance file. Charles paused for less than a breath. Now. Now. A bodyguard moved before Charles could object. Grace closed her eyes, as if that single order had reached into a place she had kept locked for 3 years. Emily looked down at the old phone again. The dead screen showed nothing, but under the peeling label, the scratched S caught the chandelier light like a tiny blade. And when Charles's assistant returned with the old file, the first page said Sophia Moretti had left the house with all personal devices in her possession. Vincent read the line once, then a second time, slower. Sophia Moretti departed the residence voluntarily at approximately 10:40 p.m. with all personal devices in her possession. The words looked clean. Too clean. They sat on the page in Charles Bellamy's careful legal language, dry enough to make grief sound like procedure. The old phone sat 5 inches away from the file, cracked and silent on the silver tray. Grace stared at the sentence as if it had reached up and slapped her. "I never said that," she whispered. Dominic folded his arms. "You signed it." "I signed where he pointed." "That is what signing means, Mrs. Carter," Charles said gently, almost sorrowfully, as if correcting a child at church. Emily stepped closer to the table, her cardigan sleeve brushing the marble edge. She did not touch the paper. She only leaned in, squinting at the bottom of the page where her mother's signature sat beneath a block of typed words. "That isn't how Mom writes her C," she said. Nobody answered for a moment. Dominic gave a short laugh. "She's 8, Vincent." "Let her speak," Vincent said. His voice was quiet enough that it sounded more dangerous than shouting. Emily pointed with one small finger, stopping just above the ink. "When Mom writes Carter, the C is open, like a little moon. This one is closed, like someone tried to make it pretty." Grace looked at the signature. Her lips parted. She seemed embarrassed to admit her own name had become strange to her. "I was shaking," she said. "I remember that, but I always write it open." Charles adjusted his left cuff, not because it needed adjusting, but because his hand had nowhere else to go. "Stress affects handwriting. This is not evidence. It is a frightened child interpreting penmanship." Vincent did not look at him. He reached for the old phone, but stopped before touching it. "Emily," he said, "show me what you saw under the label." Emily carefully lifted the phone with both hands. The peeling white label on the back had been pressed down so many times that one corner no longer stuck. In faded blue ink, Grace had written laundry drawer, "Don't lose." Emily used her thumbnail to raise the loose edge, just enough for Vincent to see beneath it. There, scratched into the plastic under the adhesive, was the crooked S. Not neat, not decorative. A hurried mark, carved hard enough to leave pale grooves. Vincent's jaw tightened. He had seen Sophia do that once with a gold hairpin on the bottom of a jewelry case after a hotel nearly sent it to the wrong suite. Small private damage, she had called it. A way to know what was hers when polite people lied. Isabella moved closer, her perfume reaching the table before she did. Sweet white flowers over something sharper. "Vince," she said softly, using the name only after the voicemail had used it first. "This is painful, but grief can make ordinary things feel meaningful." Vincent's eyes flicked to her pendant. The silver caught the chandelier again. Isabella noticed his glance and lowered her hand too late. Grace looked at the pendant then, really looked, and her face lost color. Emily noticed her mother's change. "Mom," she whispered. Grace shook her head once, too fast. Charles saw it. "Mrs. Carter," he said, his voice turning colder beneath the polish. "Be very careful before you attach new memories to old tragedies." That was when Vincent moved. He took the file, placed it beside the phone, and lined up the typed sentence with the scratched S as though the marble table had become a courtroom. "One document says Sophia left with all her devices," he said. "One device says she did not." He turned the page. Beneath the statement was a smaller attachment, a witness acknowledgement. Grace's printed name appeared under a paragraph claiming she had seen Sophia walk toward the east gate alone. Emily stared at the line, then shook her head. "No," she said. "That night Mom came back from the west hallway. Her shoes were wet on the toes. I remember because she made me put towels under the pantry door." Dominic's face changed so quickly most people would have missed it. Vincent did not. "The pantry?" he asked. Emily nodded, scared now but still standing. "The one nobody uses anymore." Charles closed the folder a little too firmly, covering the lower half of the page. "This is enough. We are not building a case on a child's memory of wet shoes." Vincent's hand came down on the file, not hard, just final. The room went still around it. Under Charles's palm, before he could hide it completely, Vincent saw the last line of the attachment. Security confirmed no activity in the West Service Corridor after 10:40 p.m. And on the old phone, under the cracked glass, the dead screen flickered once, showing the voicemail time before it vanished again. 12:06 a.m. The numbers vanished so quickly that, for a moment, no one spoke. 12:06 a.m. remained in the room anyway, colder than the marble under Vincent's hand. Charles drew himself upright, recovering the way trained men recovered, by turning panic into procedure. "Old devices misread time," he said. "A drained battery can reset, corrupt, duplicate. We should not treat a flicker on a broken screen as a legal contradiction." Dominic nodded at once. "Exactly. This is what happens when servants keep dead people's belongings in sewing boxes for 3 years. Grace flinched, but Emily did not. She slid one small hand over the phone, not to hide it, only to keep it from being swallowed by the grown-ups around the table. The grand salon suddenly felt too large for her. The chandelier was above people like Vincent and Isabella. The oil portraits stared over her head. Even the rug seemed to know she did not belong on it. A gray-haired house manager named Mr. Vale appeared near the doors, summoned by a silent look from Dominic, and said with careful politeness, "Perhaps the child should step outside while the adults resolve this." Emily's fingers tightened around the cracked case. Vincent looked at her hand, then at the phone, then at Charles. "We resolve it here." Charles spread both hands as if accepting reason. "Then let me have my office examine the device." "No, Vincent. Chain of custody matters. That is why you are not touching it." For the first time, the smile on Charles Bellamy's face did not arrive when called. Vincent turned to one of his bodyguards. "Your charger." "Not his. Plug it in on the table." The man moved immediately, pulling a plain black cable from his pocket. Emily watched the cord snake across the marble toward the old phone. She wanted to tell them to be gentle, though she knew phones did not feel pain. Still, when the plug clicked in, she held her breath. The dead screen stayed black. Isabella stepped closer to Vincent, lowering her voice just enough to sound intimate while still letting the room hear. "Vince, please. This is turning Grace's fear into a spectacle. The child is frightened. You're frightening her more." Emily looked up. "I'm not frightened of him," she said. The sentence was small, but it struck the room cleanly. Isabella's eyes moved to her, and for the first time there was no sweetness in them, only calculation hidden behind pity. "Then you should be frightened of what lies can do to your mother." Grace took one step forward. "Don't speak to her that way." Dominic laughed under his breath. "Now we're taking orders from the laundry room." Vincent's eyes shifted to Dominic, and the laugh died before it became sound. The phone lit up. A weak battery icon appeared. Then the home screen, dim and cracked by thin white fractures. A red voicemail dot pulsed in the corner. The contact name above it did not say Sophia M. Said unknown. Emily stared at it and shook her head. "That's wrong." Charles exhaled, almost relieved. "There. Unknown source. That tells us enough." "No," Emily said. "It said Sophia before." Dominic turned toward Vincent with a tired expression. "She is remembering what she wants to remember." Emily's cheeks warmed, but her voice stayed steady. "It was in the laundry drawer." The phone buzzed when Mom was folding sheets. "I saw the name. Sophia M." Mom shut it fast because she looked scared. Vincent leaned closer, not touching the screen. "Open the message information." The bodyguard did it under Vincent's instruction, one careful tap at a time. The details appeared. Received. 12:06 a.m. Duration. 1 minute, 14 seconds. Contact. Unknown. Modified. Date unavailable. Charles spoke immediately. Modified unavailable means the data is compromised. Vincent did not answer. He pressed play. Static filled the grand salon first, a dry whisper like wind under a closed door. Then Sophia's voice returned, faint but unmistakable. Vince, if Bellamy is in the room, don't say another word. A pause, a shaky breath. Behind her voice came 3 short metallic chimes. Not the grandfather clock, not the front gate, not anything that belonged in the polished room around them. Emily's head lifted. She knew that sound. Before she could speak, Charles stepped forward with sudden smoothness and closed the file over the phone's speaker, muffling Sophia's voice beneath paper. Enough, he said. We are damaging a potential exhibit. Vincent looked down at the file, then at Charles's hand resting on it. Move it. Charles moved it. The phone kept playing for 2 more seconds, just enough for the 3 metallic chimes to ring again, thin and familiar. Emily whispered. That bell only rings when someone pulls the old gate too hard. Dominic's face stayed calm, but his eyes went once, unwillingly, toward the west side of the house. Dominic's glance was so quick it might have disappeared in a room full of ordinary men. But Vincent Moretti had not survived by watching mouths. He watched hands, eyes, the first place a guilty man looked when a sound named a door he wished had stayed closed. The west side of the house sat beyond the grand salon walls, past the pantry, past the old service corridor, past the elevator servants had used before Isabella called it unsightly and Dominic had paid to have it sealed. Vincent did not move toward it yet. He turned back to the phone. Play it again, he said. Charles drew in a breath. Vincent. Repeated playback could corrupt the file. Then we make a copy first. That silenced him more effectively than anger would have. Vincent looked at the bodyguard beside the table. Airplane mode. Screen record. Then photographed the message details. Time, duration, contact name, everything. The bodyguard obeyed. Emily watched every tap, leaning forward as if her small body could keep the truth from slipping back into the dark. When the voicemail began again, the room seemed to lower itself around the sound. Static, breath, Sophia's voice, thin but still carrying the shape of the woman she had been. Vince, if Bellamy is in the room, don't say another word. Isabella is not the beginning. Dominic knows about the trust. Bellamy changed Grace's statement. Grace covered her mouth, but no sound came out. Her eyes filled, not because she had learned something new, but because the thing she had been forced to carry alone finally had a voice outside her own memory. Emily looked at her mother and slid one hand into Grace's, never taking the other off the edge of the silver tray. Isabella stood very still, too still. Her face held sorrow the way a painting held light, beautifully, without warmth. Dominic shook his head once. This is absurd. A damaged recording. 3 names spoken by a woman in distress. Proves nothing. Vincent raised one hand, and Dominic stopped. Sophia's voice continued. The original is behind the words vanished. Not faded. Not swallowed by static. Cut. 8 seconds of clean, empty hiss opened in the middle of the message like a floorboard missing from a hallway. Then came the metallic chime again. Once, twice, 3 times. A dragging sound followed, metal against metal, and Sophia's breath sharpened. If I don't make it out, believe the person they call invisible. The voicemail ended. No one moved. Vincent stared at the phone longer than anyone expected. Long enough for the battery number in the corner to drop by 1%. Long enough for Emily to notice that his right thumb had found the old wedding ring on his hand and was pressing it so hard the skin beneath it paled. He was not hearing only the message. He was remembering. A winter night 3 years ago. Isabella in black, standing beside him, telling him Sophia had left because some women could not live under family rules. Dominic with a hand on his shoulder, saying a clean break was kinder than chasing shame. Charles placing a statement before him, neat and final, explaining voluntary departure in language dry enough to bury a marriage. Vincent took a slow breath. Seal the phone, he said. Charles blinked. Excuse me? Evidence bag. Now. A bodyguard left and returned with a clear plastic pouch from the security office. Vincent did not let anyone else pick up the device. He nodded to Emily. You carried it in. You set it inside. Emily looked frightened by the responsibility, but she understood the shape of it. With both hands, she lifted the old phone, careful not to touch the screen, and placed it inside the open pouch. The cracked blue case looked smaller behind plastic, almost harmless. That made it worse. Vincent signed across the seal with his initials and wrote the time. 4:42 p.m. Then he looked at Charles. Now it has chain of custody. Charles's jaw flexed once before the lawyer in him covered it. A sealed rumor is still a rumor. Emily spoke before Vincent could. It's not a rumor if she knew Mom's paper was changed. The words were simple, child-sized, and impossible to dress up. Grace lowered her eyes as if expecting punishment for her daughter's courage. None came. Vincent turned toward the west hallway, where the old service corridor waited behind polished walls and family silence. Open the pantry. Dominic's voice came too fast. That elevator hasn't worked in years. Vincent looked back at him then, cold and quiet. I didn't ask about the elevator. And for the first time since the phone had spoken, Dominic Moretti did not have an answer ready. Dominic's silence lasted only a second, but Vincent heard everything inside it. The west pantry door stood at the end of the corridor like part of the wall, painted the same soft cream as the molding, polished enough to disappear. A young guard reached for it, but Vincent raised 2 fingers and everyone stopped. Grace opens it, he said. Grace looked at him as if she had misheard. Sir, you knew this house before they taught it to lie. No one spoke after that. Even Isabella's perfume seemed to thin in the colder air of the hallway. Grace stepped forward, her apron still damp, her hands trembling only when she touched the brass knob. Emily stood close beside her mother, not clinging, only near enough that their sleeves brushed. The door stuck at first. Then it gave with a low wooden sigh. Inside, the pantry smelled of dust, old soap, and metal. Shelves lined the walls, mostly empty now except for covered serving trays and boxes of white linen nobody used. For a few seconds, the only sound was rain tapping the tall window at the far end of the service corridor, soft and ordinary, like the house was trying to pretend this was just another afternoon. Then Emily whispered, "The bell came from there." She pointed toward the narrow service elevator gate behind a stack of folded banquet chairs. It was painted over, the kind of thing rich houses hid when they wanted the staff to become invisible. A brass maintenance plate had been screwed above the frame. Newer than the wall, cleaner than everything around it. Vincent stepped close and read the date stamped at the bottom. 2 days after Sophia disappeared. Dominic spoke too quickly. We replaced it after the malfunction. You remember that? Vincent did not turn. I remember being told there was a malfunction. Charles moved beside him, careful, measured. A maintenance plate proves maintenance. Nothing more. Emily walked around the chairs, small enough to slip through the tight space adults avoided. Grace reached for her. Emily, don't. I'm not touching the elevator, Emily said. She crouched and pointed to the bottom corner of the metal panel. There's tape. Vincent looked down. Behind the old gate, under a lip of metal where dust had gathered thick, a strip of gray tape had curled loose. Not fresh, not ancient, hidden. He nodded to the guard. The guard pulled on gloves, lifted the edge of the panel, and something slid out with a dry scrape. A flat waterproof envelope, sealed in cloudy plastic. No dramatic blood. No hidden weapon. Just paper. That made it colder. Vincent had seen paper destroy more lives than bullets ever could. The guard placed it on a clean linen cloth. Charles looked at it, and this time his face did not recover fast enough. Inside were photocopied pages. A draft of the Family Continuity Trust, marked with Charles Bellamy's initials in the corner, and a witness statement bearing Grace Carter's name. The first page matched the file in the Grand Salon. The second did not. A single sentence had been inserted between 2 paragraphs, slightly darker than the rest. Mrs. Moretti left willingly through the east gate, and I saw no sign of distress. Grace stared at it. Her knees softened. Emily caught her mother's hand with both of hers. "Mom!" Grace did not look at Vincent. She looked at the paper, at the sentence wearing her name like a stolen coat. "They didn't just make her disappear, sir," she said, the words barely holding together. "They made me help them on paper." Vincent's face did not change, but something behind his eyes went very still. Emily lifted her chin, fighting the shake in her voice. "We don't want money," she said. "I just don't want people saying Mom lied when she was scared." The sentence landed harder than accusation. Vincent folded the photocopy back into the envelope without removing it fully, preserving the edges, the tape, the order. "Photograph everything in place," he told his guard. "Then seal it. Same chain as the phone." Charles cleared his throat. "Vincent, before this becomes an internal embarrassment, I strongly recommend we pause and review privately." Vincent looked at him at last. "No. We continue exactly as planned." Isabella's eyes flickered. Dominic's jaw tightened. They thought he meant the signing. Vincent let them think it. He turned the envelope slightly, and a smaller slip of paper slid against the plastic, showing 5 words in faded ink. "No white roses in winter." Vincent stared at them, then toward the grand salon where Isabella's white roses waited around the unsigned papers. For 3 years, he had believed Sophia had left through the East Gate. For 3 years, Grace had carried the shame of a sentence she never wrote. And only now did Vincent understand that the weakest people in his house had been placed closest to the danger because he had trusted the polished ones standing beside him. Vincent let the 5 faded words remain visible just long enough for everyone near the pantry door to see them. "No white roses in winter." Then he covered the slip with the edge of the envelope and nodded to the guard with the camera. "Seal it with the others." His voice was so even that Isabella almost relaxed. "Almost." "We return to the grand salon," he said. "The signing will continue in 1 hour." Grace looked at him as if the floor had shifted under her feet. Emily's small hand tightened around her mother's. Dominic's shoulders eased by half an inch, and Charles recovered his professional sadness. "That is wise," the lawyer said. "A family matter should not be allowed to spiral because of incomplete impressions." Vincent did not answer. He only adjusted the silver watch on his wrist, turning the face inward for a moment. Across the hall, a man who had stood in silence near the dining room saw the gesture and disappeared without a word. Vincent walked back toward the grand salon slowly enough to make no one hurry, but every step seemed to close a door behind him. The room had changed while they were gone. The white roses still surrounded the unsigned papers. The wine still sat untouched. The pen still waited where Charles had placed it. But now the old phone was sealed in clear plastic beside the trust draft, and the envelope from the pantry lay under a second evidence seal with Vincent's initials across the strip. Emily stood near the sideboard again, small beneath the portraits, but no longer alone in the same way. Vincent looked at her once. "Emily," he said, "those words, 'no white roses in winter,' where did you hear them?" Isabella's hand stopped on the back of a chair. Charles looked down as if checking the alignment of the papers. Dominic reached for his phone, then seemed to remember Vincent had not dismissed anyone. Emily swallowed. "Mrs. Sophia used to say it in the laundry room," she said. "Not to me, just to herself. Like a song with no music." "When?" Vincent asked. "On rainy days," Emily said. "When Mom folded the white tablecloths. Mrs. Sophia would put one white rose by the sink, then take it away before anyone saw. She said white roses didn't belong in winter because they were pretending not to be cold." The room went quiet in a different way. Not shocked, listening. Vincent turned to his consigliere, who had re-entered through the side door with a slim laptop case and 2 strangers. A woman in a navy suit carrying a forensic kit, and a gray-haired man Vincent had not seen in 3 years. Grace recognized him first. "Mr. Hale," she whispered. The former head of security looked at the floor before he looked at Vincent. "Sir." Dominic's face hardened. "Why is he here?" "Vincent finally Saturday because you fired him the week after Sophia disappeared." Charles's smile returned, but it was thinner now. "Vincent, Bringing in former employees with grievances is not a sound process. The forensic woman placed her kit on the marble table. Then you'll appreciate that I'm independent. Vincent nodded toward the sealed phone. Clone it. No changes to the original. Charles stepped forward. I object to any unsupervised forensic handling. You may observe, Vincent said. From there. The distance was only 12 feet. It might as well have been a locked gate. The woman photographed the seal, logged the time, and connected the old phone to a clean device. A small progress bar appeared on her screen. 1%. 2. 3. No one touched the wine. No one touched the papers. Rain tapped faintly against the grand salon windows, steady and patient. Emily watched the screen as if the thin blue line were a fuse. At 38%, Charles's phone vibrated against the table. He did not reach for it. Vincent looked at it, then at him. Not answering? It can wait. Can it? The progress bar reached 100. The forensic woman opened a directory labeled archive. It asked for a password. Charles gave a quiet laugh. And now we reach the wall. A child's memory is not a password protocol. Vincent looked at Emily. Not commanding. Asking. Emily's face went pale, but she said the words carefully, the way she remembered them. No white roses in winter. The woman typed. For 1 second, nothing happened. Then the folder opened. Grace made a sound like a breath breaking in half. Inside were 2 files, an audio backup and a photograph of a contract page. The forensic woman opened the photograph first. It showed the family continuity trust, but not the version Charles had arranged on the table. This one had a blank signature line, and beside it, in a digital folder tag, were the words, V. Moretti signature scan approved. Vincent did not move. He looked at the image, then at Charles, then at Isabella, whose hand had risen again to Sophia's silver pendant. Dominic finally understood. His eyes moved from the laptop to Emily, and this time he looked at the child not as a servant's daughter, not as an interruption, but as the person who had opened the door they had all paid to keep sealed. Dominic's eyes stayed on Emily 1 second too long, and Vincent saw the moment the room changed for him. The child was no longer background. She was no longer a maid's daughter with a cracked phone and a frightened mother. She was the small hand that had turned the locked key. Vincent rose without hurry. Bring them in. The double doors opened, and the grand salon filled with witnesses, not soldiers. A second notary in a gray suit. 2 senior staff members who had served the house before Sophia vanished. Mr. Hale, the former head of security, standing stiffly beside the wall. The independent forensic examiner with her laptop still open. Vincent's consigliere placed a small recorder on the marble table and set it blinking red. Charles Bellamy looked at it, then at Vincent. This is excessive. No, Vincent said. This is what your paperwork should have been 3 years ago. One by one, he laid the sealed evidence on the table. The cracked old phone in its plastic pouch, Grace's altered statement, the draft trust from the pantry envelope, the service elevator maintenance plate photographed in place, the phone archive now copied onto a forensic drive, and the engagement packet with the family continuity trust hidden beneath it. Emily stood beside Grace near the sideboard. She looked smaller than ever among all those adults, but she did not step back. Isabella touched Sophia's silver pendant again, then forced her hand down. The forensic examiner connected her laptop to the room display. The first image appeared on the wall, voicemail metadata. Received at 12:06 a.m., modified later under a user profile registered to Bellamy Legal Holdings. Charles folded his hands. A user profile is not a person. The examiner clicked again. Login location. Charles Bellamy's private office terminal. Device serial number. Timestamp. Backup path. The room held its breath. Vincent did not look triumphant. He looked older. The next file appeared. Gate activity logs from the night Sophia disappeared. The official report showed no movement in the West Service Corridor after 10:40 p.m. The recovered backup showed a service elevator access at 12:03 a.m., then a manual deletion from Dominic Moretti's office account 2 days later. Dominic's mouth tightened, but he stayed silent. Then came the email. Sent from Isabella Romano's private address 3 days before the signing. Attachment name, V. Moretti signature scan approved. Beneath it was the same trust page Charles had placed under Vincent's hand that afternoon. Vincent stared at the signature line. His own name copied cleanly, waiting to be used without him. For a moment he could not speak. His face went pale, not with fear, but with the weight of realizing how close he had come to helping them finish the lie. He saw Grace in the wet apron, accused under his roof. He saw Emily holding the phone with both hands because every adult in the room wanted it gone. He saw Sophia's name turned into unknown. The forensic examiner opened the audio backup. Sophia's voice filled the grand salon again, clearer now, no longer buried under static. Vince, if you hear this, don't sign anything Isabella brings you. Dominic knows about the trust. Bellamy changed Grace's statement. The original is behind the west elevator panel. If I don't make it out, believe the person they call invisible. Grace lowered her head, shaking once. Emily reached up and held her mother's wrist. Charles said, very softly, that recording was made under emotional distress. Before Vincent could answer, Isabella broke her perfect stillness. Sophia was going to ruin all of you. The sentence fell out too sharp, too naked. She heard herself after it was too late. Vincent turned to her. No anger crossed his face. That made it worse. He reached down, picked up the old phone in its clear pouch, and placed it directly in front of Charles Bellamy. You buried her voice in paperwork, he said. A child brought it back in her hands. Then he looked at his consigliere, calm enough to freeze the room. Call the federal prosecutor and keep the recorder running. The recorder's red light kept blinking after Vincent spoke, small and steady, as if the room itself had finally learned to remember. No one moved toward the doors. No one reached for a phone. The power in the grand salon had shifted so quietly that it took a moment for everyone to understand it was no longer held by the people in the best clothes. Charles Bellamy opened his mouth, then closed it when Vincent's consigliere placed a call on speaker and identified himself to the federal prosecutor's office as counsel for Vincent Moretti, reporting suspected document fraud, evidence tampering, obstruction, and attempted unlawful control of family business assets. Charles's face did not break. It emptied. Dominic stepped back from the table, one hand half raised as if to explain, but Vincent looked at him and said, your access to the port accounts, the casino trust, and every family operating file is suspended as of this minute. The notary wrote it down. The consigliere witnessed it. Mr. Hale, the old security chief, stood straighter against the wall, as if 3 years had come off his shoulders in one breath. Isabella removed her hand from Sophia's pendant too late. The forensic examiner enlarged the archived photo on the display, and there it was around Sophia's neck in the final week before she disappeared. The same silver pendant, resting against a navy dress beside the west staircase. Vincent looked at it for a long time. He did not grab it. He did not shout. He asked the notary to record the pendant as potential evidence, and only then did Isabella's elegance leave her face. 2 uniformed private security officers escorted her from the grand salon, not like a queen betrayed, but like a suspect whose story had finally met paper. The engagement packet was stamped void. The family continuity trust was suspended pending review. Charles Bellamy was removed as legal representative of the Moretti family on record, in front of witnesses, and every document he had prepared regarding Sophia Moretti, Grace Carter, and the trust was placed under preservation order. Dominic said Vincent's name once, low and wounded, but Vincent did not answer him as family. He answered him as a man reading a ledger. You used my grief as a signature. Dominic looked away first. Only after the calls were made, the evidence sealed, the witnesses named, and the doors guarded did Vincent turn to Grace. She still stood beside the sideboard in her damp apron, as if part of her was waiting to be sent back to the kitchen. Emily held her wrist with both hands. Vincent walked to them, slowly enough that Grace had time to decide whether to step back. She did not. He stopped in front of her, in the same room where she had been accused, and said clearly, for every person left in the grand salon to hear, Grace Carter did not steal from this house. She protected the last honest thing in it. Grace's mouth trembled, but she stayed standing. Vincent continued. The false statement bearing her name would be withdrawn in writing. Her employment record would be corrected. Her back pay, withheld bonuses, and housing status would be reviewed by independent counsel, not by the family office. She would receive her own attorney, paid for by the estate but answerable only to her. She and Emily would leave the servants' quarters that night, not as a reward to silence them, but for protection as witnesses. A safe house on the property's north side would be opened, with lights, heat, locks Grace controlled, and a written guarantee that no one could remove them for telling the truth. Emily looked up when Vincent said her name. He did not call her brave for the room to applaud. He did something harder. He lowered his voice and said, "You do not have to carry grown people's secrets anymore." Emily held the sealed phone in both hands one last time before giving it back to the forensic examiner. "I didn't save it," she said. "Mom did. I only pressed play." Vincent went still. Then he nodded, as if the child had corrected the final record. Later, when the white roses had been taken from the table and the unsigned papers boxed for investigators, the grand salon felt less like a throne room and more like a room in a house where someone had finally opened a window. Grace's false statement lay marked for correction. Sophia's case was reopened as a staged disappearance, not a voluntary departure. The old phone was logged, sealed, copied, and placed in a clear evidence case beside the trust draft and the altered file. Before Emily left with her mother, Vincent opened the front doors himself instead of sending them through the servants' hall. Rain shone on the stone steps. Warm light spilled behind them. Emily paused at the threshold in her patched cardigan and looked back at the man who had almost signed away the truth. "She wanted you to hear her," she said. Vincent could not answer for a moment. The whole house was listening now, and for the first time in 3 years, the smallest voice in the room had become the one no one could erase.